raped in front of my own house. I had to be hospitalized, and while I was there, my probation officer reached out to Linda Smith of Shared Hope, hoping she could find some place where I would be safe and where they had the skills to address my many needs. Finally, she located Youth for Tomorrow in Virginia, 3,000 miles away. I had to go that far from my frightened mother and siblings because there was no place closer to home that could give me the help I needed to heal. The day I was released from the hospital, Linda arranged for me to move into a beautiful hotel room until I could be safely relocated. The memory of that view from the room, the view of freedom, still brings tears to my eyes. Sadly, my story of seduction exploitation is not unique. Many girls go through what I did and much more. I saw victims younger than I was. One of the girls was 10 years old, and I knew girls much older who had been exploited since they were my age. Unfortunately, for others, my story of restoration is unique. Shelters and services for the protection and restoration of child sex trafficking victims are scarce. Being sent home on probation did not address the trauma bonds and fear that caused me to return to my trafficker. My journey has made me strong enough to be a voice for others. My faith in God and His remarkable way of making beauty from ashes has emboldened me to speak to you on their behalf. The funding of organizations like the ones I have mentioned is vital. Without them, I would not be sitting here. Congress has the power to make development of shelter services a priority. The journey from victim to survivor and advocate, the journey I was able to take, depends on it. For my part, I have shared my story in a critical awareness video produced by Shared Hope International called Chosen. It is my hope that it will keep many from the ordeal I endured by alerting them to the techniques used by traffickers and the devastating result of believing their lies. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for your testimony. Next is Detective William Woolf from the Fairfax County Police Department, who you live in Manassas. I guess you had a little trouble coming in today.
Yes, sir. There's a little bit of traffic this morning, sorry.
But thank you very much, and he's done an outstanding job out there in Fairfax County. We'll just turn it over to you, Detective Woolf.
Well, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to speak before this committee this morning about the issues of human trafficking, specifically what we're seeing in the Northern Virginia region. Recently, some of the strides that we've made is we were recently awarded a grant from the Department of Justice to start a human trafficking task force in Northern Virginia, and that's an enhanced collaborative task force in conjunction with Fairfax County Police Department, Polaris Project, as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. That was a direct result of the rise in issues that we saw in Northern Virginia. We've had several notable cases in the Northern Virginia area, to include the underground gangster Crips case, which a group of Crips gang members were exploiting young girls for over 6 years in the region. These girls were going to school every day in the same communities where they lived and in the same communities where they were being exploited as well. We know that that particular group exploited hundreds of girls over the 6 years that they were active. We've had cases like the Black Italian family, where Mr. Barkas and Dumas recruited girls from underage girls from various states and trafficked them into Virginia for the purposes of commercial sex. At the time that we interdicted that enterprise, they had 6 juveniles that were actively working for them in Northern Virginia. As a result of that and many other cases, we were able to, Fairfax County Police Department established their first human trafficking unit, which falls under the Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Task Force. That unit started in October 2013, and since that time, we've received over 70 tips and leads regarding human trafficking specific to the Northern Virginia region. 52% of those leads involve juvenile sex trafficking cases. So we're seeing a predominance of cases with underage girls that are being lured and induced into this lifestyle and being exploited by their traffickers. Part of the reason that we've seen such a rise in the number of cases that, particularly in Northern Virginia, is due to our enhanced ability to identify the victims. Working with partners like Shared Hope International, the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, we've received the training, law enforcement's received the training to be better equipped at identifying victims of trafficking that for so long were misidentified as troubled youth or other various traditional ideologies that we've had. Through the collaboration that we've had with the schools, community members, court services units, we've been able to educate them as well on how to identify and address trafficking scenarios. And so because of that, a lot more of the victims in Northern Virginia are being identified as such, as victims, and we are in the process of enhancing our ability to provide them with the services that they need. It's important to note that, as you all have heard this morning, the amount of trauma that goes in to the victimization piece of this particular crime is that which is beyond most other crimes that we see here in the United States. They're life-altering for the victims. I've seen it firsthand in the young girls that I've had the opportunity to work with. And because of that, we've shifted our approach, and we've taken on a very victim-centered approach. Our number one priority is recovering and rescuing these young people from these terrible situations. The problem with that is it's extremely resource-intensive, both for law enforcement as well as the other individuals in the community, those that are taking on treating those that are trafficking victims. But we also see an increase not just in our ability to identify the victims, but we're also seeing an increase in the activity itself. And the reason that that is mostly because of the internet. The ability for these traffickers to not only operate or conduct their criminal operations behind closed doors through the mask of the internet, but also their ability to recruit these individuals as well. They commonly exploit social media sites such as Facebook, Twitter, and things of that nature to be able to target their recruitment efforts, making them a lot more effective and efficient. They're going on and finding young people that may have a particular vulnerability in their life at that time that the traffickers can exploit and draw them into a life of sexual servitude. We see other internet-based companies like Backpage.com that is openly and in some senses legally advertising commercial sex. It gives these traffickers the opportunity to advertise to the general public these sexual services and to advertise essentially our children online. And because of this increase in activity, we call for a much more comprehensive and robust approach to addressing these particular issues. The Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Task Force has taken on a model very similar to, as the chairman well knows, the Northern Virginia Regional Gang Task Force, which has been extremely successful in addressing the gang issues in Northern Virginia. And that model, the way that we approach those issues in Northern Virginia, seems to have a lot of merit in addressing the issues of human trafficking as well in the region. And so that approach is essentially a three-pronged approach. And the first thing that we are doing to address the issue and the first need that we have is education and awareness. We found that through educating the general public, most individuals here in the United States are unaware that trafficking is even going on. They're aware that their children are potentially at risk to be victims of trafficking. And so by raising awareness within the community, we feel that we will be a lot more effective at combating the issue. One thing that we feel is essential is an anti-trafficking campaign, something that should be on a national level, because this particular crime is something that affects all communities. It's a crime that does not discriminate on race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic class. It's something that has the potential of touching each and every community in each and every state here in the United States. And so the need for a national anti-trafficking campaign that's focused on our young people, that draws the attention at educating parents and teenagers alike, is critical to being able to ultimately prevent this heinous crime. We would ultimately, like I said, like to prevent the crime, then have to intervene through law enforcement action later on once the victimization has already been done. The next phase to that is prevention. So we raise awareness in the community, and then we institute programs within the community to prevent this type of victimization. Fairfax County Public Schools have developed a curriculum for all students that attend the public schools that begins in the 6th grade and extends all the way through the 12th grade. And this curriculum is based on not just awareness of trafficking within the community, but also gives our students, our teen population, the skills and abilities to be able to recognize and get out of those bad situations that may eventually lead to trafficking. This type of curriculum is essential for our teens, again, across the country right now. It's education and awareness and a skill set that many of our teens lack today that leaves them vulnerable to being drawn into this particular type of scenario. The necessity for after-school programs and other types of programs that will help to support our children. We know that the majority of homes in the United States right now, both parents are working, they're career parents, and so we need programs focused on better supporting our teenage population during those after-school hours when they might otherwise be left to their own devices. And then also programs for at-risk youth. There are some pretty innovative programs in Northern Virginia that we are enhancing based on our knowledge of trafficking. Arlington County's Girls Outreach Program, which specifically targets at-risk youth, particularly girls, and provides them with an after-school program that mentors them, gives them counseling, and helps them learn how to make good choices and decisions in their lives. This particular program has been extremely successful in teaching our children and our youth how to avoid trafficking scenarios. And then finally, the third prong is the intervention piece. If it gets to the piece where, unfortunately, a young boy or girl is drawn into this trafficking scenario, then law enforcement has to intervene and recover and assist in restoration of that particular victim. And as you all heard this morning, the need for residential treatment facilities is essential across the country right now. Some people are having to come 3,000 miles just to find a treatment center here in Virginia that can provide adequate treatment for the victim, as well as providing for a safe location as well. And this is a challenge for law enforcement and social services alike, that once we recover that juvenile victim, where do we place them? What is an appropriate placement for them? So the need for these types of facilities and the specialized training is absolutely essential. The Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Task Force has responded in collaboration with Prince William County Court Services and a private counseling company in Northern Virginia called the Multicultural Clinical Center in developing a training that is unique for residential facilities to provide long-term therapeutic support for victims of trafficking. There are very, very few facilities that have specialized training, specifically if we talk about gang-controlled sex trafficking, that understand the dynamics at work with the level of sexual assault that occurs in these types of scenarios. So that is a program that we have taken on and responded to the need in Northern Virginia, but really it's a need that exists across the United States right now. Obviously, enhancing laws and sentencing guidelines is a huge deterrent for this type of criminal behavior. One of the frustrations that we see in law enforcement and for prosecutors alike is the judges are consistently going below the federal sentencing guidelines. They are oftentimes just imposing the mandatory minimums as provided by the statute, when the guidelines suggest much higher penalties for this type of criminal conduct. The need for increased task forces as well, and those task forces being able to operate more effectively. Again, drawing your attention to the successes of the Northern Virginia Regional Gang Task Force and the abilities that it had in combating and suppressing gang activity. Being able to model the human trafficking task forces off of the successes that they've had, we feel is essential to combating this particular issue. Overall, these are some of the major things that we are seeing with regards to trafficking in Northern Virginia, and it's also, as we speak and coordinate with law enforcement across the country, they're seeing the exact same scenarios. And also, the last piece that I just wanted to address very briefly is the need for federal legislation addressing the demand side. There are individuals out there that are purchasing sex from our children, and these individuals need to be punished, or we at least need the tools to be able to address that as well, particularly when their actions are affecting interstate commerce. There are currently no federal statutes that are applicable to addressing the demand side of the issue. So, thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. I had promised Ms. Noem I was going to let her say something. I'm not going to ask questions until the end. So first, I'll go. Congresswoman, do you want to? Yeah, you wanted to make a statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the members of the committee for the honor of sitting at the dais today and being able to make a statement on this issue. While I'm not a member of this committee, I'm certainly passionate about the issue. You know, I'm a mother of 3. I've got 2 daughters that I know that for most of their lives while they were young girls and teenagers, I never would have dreamed that when I sent them out the door to go to school or to the mall or to a store, that they were in jeopardy of being trafficked. I, like most moms in this country, I think, and I know certainly in my state of South Dakota, when we think about human trafficking, we think about the knowledge that we've experienced through the media or potentially through movies that we've seen and thought about it internationally and not so much at home in our day-to-day lives. It's not until the last few years where the more that I learn about this issue, the more it keeps me up at night. And I've begun to learn and to realize over the last several years the issues that we have in my own state of South Dakota, how prevalent it is during hunting season, that we have a motorcycle bike rally in Sturgis, South Dakota that happens every year where it is a big operation, that we have issues on our reservations that have been going on for decades, but that also we have it going on at our schools, that we have kids that are being approached and brought in, much like Stephanie's story that she told. Could start through Facebook or Twitter, where they start becoming attached to a stranger who says kind and nice things to them and draws them into this industry where they soon find that they are being used and utilized in ways that they never dreamed possible. So for me, it breaks my heart, and I think we need to do all that we can to stop this deplorable industry and those involved in it. I had on Monday an event called the Justice Against Slavery Summit. It was probably the most comprehensive summit that we've had in South Dakota that brought together law enforcement officials, it brought together school counselors, administrators, outside organizations, faith-based organizations, legislators, to talk about what we could do in our state and across the country to help stop human trafficking and sex trafficking that was going on. Some of the greatest needs that have been talked about here today already have not only been the tools that we need at the federal level with legislation to make sure we can prosecute those who not only perpetuate the industry by being the pimps that recruit and bring our young women and men into the industry, but also those Johns who go out there and create the market. And what we need all the tools we can possibly get to stop them and to prosecute them to the highest extent possible. But also I've been working with my state legislators to make sure that our state laws are as high as possible. Then we need to work to make sure the awareness is out there. I guess 2 of the things that we identified were very key on Monday and that we're going to continue to work together as a comprehensive group is to make sure that the awareness level is high. And this hearing today will help with that. I think it has helped a lot already just in my conversations and the conversations that will happen after this hearing is long over on the information that we've been able to gather and how we can use that to go out and tell the story to the rest of America. So all moms and dads and teachers and counselors and people that see individuals on the street can be aware and know what to look for to help prevent the trafficking before it ever starts. And then after that, the biggest gap that I see is once we do have victims out there is that we have a lack of ability to restore them because of a lack of shelters, of centers that can bring them the help and hope that they need into the future. So we need to do all that we can to make sure we're cooperating together with nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations, but also in our role as federal legislators and state legislators to work to make sure that we have facilities there so that when someone calls and they need help and they can get out of this industry, that we know where we can send them so they can get the help that they need to be whole and to be healed and to go forward as well. So, you know, President Kennedy often said the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. and doing nothing is not acceptable in this industry. Each of you has been an advocate in this area, and I want to thank you for bringing attention to it, and I certainly want to be your partner in this war that we find ourselves engaged in. I look forward to all of the testimony that we hear today and to working with you and all the organizations to stop human trafficking, to stop sex trafficking, and certainly to make sure that this evil can be stopped. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Harris?
I want to thank the chairman for calling the hearing. I just have one question for the detective. What's the role of, do drugs play in this, in the sex trafficking?
So very commonly we see the use of illegal narcotics as a way to maintain control over the girls. One of the trends that we are seeing is a moving away from some of the more traditional drugs associated with prostitution, such as heroin and cocaine, and a move towards some of the more designer drugs like Molly and ecstasy. The main reason is for the traffickers because it does not have the negative physical effects. In other words, the users do not appear as strung out, if you will, by using those drugs. And so again, unfortunately, the truth of the matter is, to the traffickers, these girls are simply a product. And so they want their product to look good, to look presentable, so that they can make more money. So they use some of these other narcotics as a means of control.
And these other drugs, I take it, are also have addictive properties.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
So that addiction is part of the problem as well.
Absolutely.
Access to
Typically, we see that a lot of times these more intense drugs are introduced to the victims by the traffickers. Prior to their involvement in sex trafficking, they had not had any exposure to those drugs.
To those drugs. What about drugs in general?
Typically marijuana, they do have access to that, but again, some of the more harder drugs they've not had exposure to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me also thank you for convening this hearing, and to our witnesses, and Stephanie, thank you for your words and sharing. There's a couple of things. I think that we've historically centers on prevention, and then we look at institutions that look at intervention and try to do some correction. We know that all of those areas are really low on resources to be able to do a full work. So, and there's some bills that being brought through the process in Congress. But one of the things I've noticed is that besides schools and other institutions where we interact with youngsters, the word awareness was brought up. And it seems to me that there has to be a greater sense of awareness and vigilance of, I think, just about everybody in our society, because this is so prevalent. And some of the things that raised my eyebrows when I started to look into this a little bit more deeply is there's a group called the Airline Ambassadors who have taken it upon themselves, because they see themselves interacting with a lot of folks, not necessarily engaged in negative behavior, but they tend to be interacting, part of that flow of folks. So when people are more aware of telltale signs, they become more aware. So there seems to be that there should be some more training in the other industries, just besides the law enforcement, social services, schools. Awareness among, and I guess in the airline ambassadors, their point is the other industries need to take some sort of oath or awareness that they're not going to put up with this kind of nonsense. And when they see these kinds of things, that there should be some reporting. And to make that reporting not a negative thing, but a positive thing, and so that there's no repercussions. I'm a classroom teacher, and I was a principal. We were required to report what we thought might be abuse. But a lot of my teachers were reluctant because they didn't want to get involved, because it's a very sensitive situation. So I took it upon myself for them to report to me, and then I'll take it over. But through that process, we learn a lot, and we save a lot of grief, and we prevent a lot of grief, but we also address a lot of issues in families. So it seems like we need to expand our conversation beyond the typical institutions into the private industry and engage them. And one of the things that I've read is some of the lessons learned when folks are more in tune of what's going on in social events such as Super Bowl. Super Bowl brings in all kinds of folks globally, and that seems to be an event that allows a lot of these kinds of activities to continue or to be pursued without not a lot of oversight and sensitivity. So I'd be interested in some of your comments. One on whether we've invited you to take part in writing some of these policies, looking at it so that we can look at gaps that you would see because you're involved in it. Two, Stephanie, you should be looking at that too as a person who's out there now looking at how you work with the community and young people and to look for gaps in our policy making. And the second, a comment on extending the network into the private industry, such as airlines and Super Bowl hosts and communities like that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Honda. Some of the things that we're doing in Northern Virginia right now is we are working with Fairfax Connector, which is the public transportation system, as well as Metro in the Northern Virginia region, to train, again, speaking of kind of that larger industry of professionals that may come in contact with potential victims or traffickers and helping them to identify. So we are in the process of developing some protocol for bus drivers and other individuals to not just identify, but also a reporting mechanism to report suspicious activity as well. And so I definitely feel that, based on my experiences and my knowledge, that expanding into the private sector, working with transportation services as well as hotels and other industries that we know that victims are coming in contact with the workers there, and educating them on the realities of trafficking and as well as how to respond to those particular scenarios. We have, during the course of investigations, we've spoken to staff at hotels, and we have, in law enforcement, have learned quite a bit because the staff has been able to educate us on some of the red flags that they look for, and that they're aware of when there's a potential trafficking or, at minimum, commercial sex going on in that particular location. And it is all about kind of enhancing the collaboration between law enforcement and the private industry when it comes to these types of cases that will ultimately enhance our ability to prevent and interdict in these types of situations. Raising awareness, like you said, sir, is extremely important. One of the other efforts that we have is we've launched a public awareness campaign in Northern Virginia. It's called the Just Ask campaign, and the idea behind that is that we need to be out there asking questions. The cornerstone of that campaign is a website, which is justaskva.org, that is aimed at the teen population. There's a section that is geared strictly for teens, a section that's geared towards parents, and a section that's geared towards community members. It provides them with awareness training as well as identifying red flags and reporting mechanisms and how to respond to those situations as well. So I think that you raise a very valid point in that those are essential steps as we move forward in this process.
Thank you.
Either can answer the question. Stephanie, what message would you have for anyone who's currently in the grip of human trafficking now?
Well, basically my message would be like, look for help, and if there's no help available, just don't give up hope, because help is coming. I mean, people now are getting more aware and things like that. I mean, when I was in trafficking, I didn't have hope because there wasn't much there, but now there is. So that's basically what I would say.
I was taking, you had to come 3,000 miles. I don't want to know where you came from, we won't say, but was there nothing near you, or how did Linda Smith find you, or did you find Linda?
My probation officer reached out to Shared Hope with Linda Smith. There was no centers or anything like that near my home that was available.
Would it make sense for all of the churches in a community, for instance, in Loudoun County, in Prince William County, and Fairfax County, to come together with the Joe Gibbs home or something? Because I think you separate this, it's stopping it from taking place, education. Then when you find someone in, where do they go? So should all the churches, should this be something that the churches come together, that there are a series of homes, not only in Northern Virginia, this is just not a Northern Virginia hearing, it's for the country.
I think that tapping into our faith-based communities as a way to kind of provide resources and housing and treatment for trafficking victims would be a very good idea. A lot of them are very motivated, as you're well aware, in Northern Virginia. There's the Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative, which is a consortium of Christian churches in the area that are providing victim services. The key is being able to provide the appropriate training for these facilities. Trafficking is a very unique set of complex trauma issues that need to be addressed. And so we need to ensure that we're not just placing victims in a location where they may not receive proper treatment, because that may actually do more harm than it does good in certain circumstances. Places like Youth for Tomorrow have an excellent model, an excellent treatment model. They very much understand the issues regarding trafficking. Of course, the problem with those particular facilities is as soon as a bed opens up, I fill it with another victim. So
Right.
the space is just not available right now throughout the country to place some of these girls. The other thing, just for the committee to be aware of, one of the issues that we consider when addressing the issue of placement is safety. So is it safe to put a Northern Virginia girl in a treatment center that's in Northern Virginia, or do we need to move them to another location for their safety? But then finding an appropriate location that is trained and has the adequate abilities to address those issues is very difficult.
Is there a coalition of treatment centers that you can go online and find in Delaware and California and wherever, here's the place to go? Is there a list, if you will?
There's no formal list.
Shouldn't there be? Shouldn't this, I mean, maybe Polaris working with others put together a place that if this is impacted on your community, here's where you go for training, here's where you go for rescue. Should there not be? Has anyone looked at putting together a nationwide?
The National Human Trafficking Resource Center, which is commonly referred to as the Human Trafficking Hotline, does have a comprehensive list of places throughout the United States. I think the issue is that list is very short, particularly when it comes to juveniles or adults of sex trafficking, when we talk about long-term treatment. And that's the biggest deficiency. There are quite a few quick fixes to situations to respond to a situation of crisis or short-term treatment or placement. But when it comes to more long-term care, which I am by no means a counselor or a therapist, but in working with these programs, it's my understanding and experience that the program should be 6 months at minimum. Most programs should be closer to a year, if not longer, to adequately address those particular issues.
Do the hotels know? When I looked at the case that Neil brought, I looked at some of those hotels. I drive by some of those hotels. I mean, if anyone wants to see the hotel, frankly, I don't think anybody ought to go to those hotels. Just look at the indictments and see, did those hotel owners, did the people know? I've even approached and said, why don't you put a conference on it? They haven't responded. Do you think a hotel knows that this is going on in their hotel?
I believe some of the workers are aware, particularly the cleaning services that are going into the rooms and seeing what is there. I think that we have the ability to educate the hotels and the staff there as far as what some of the warning signs are.
Well, what we'll do, we'll write the Hotel Association for Northern Virginia and challenge them to call you to put a conference on for all the hotel owners. But do you think some of the people in the hotels know what's going on?
I think they know that there's commercial sex going on. I don't think they particularly understand that it's sex trafficking.
What do you tell, what's the message both of you would have for a parent? Congresswoman Noam talked about, I have 16 grandkids. I have 8 granddaughters. What's the message out there to a parent? I mean, the media's listening. What should a parent be looking for? What should a parent know?
Basically, the fact that their child's not being very social with them or their friends anymore, changing their clothing, the way they walk, the way they talk, staying the night at friends' houses more often than they usually do, not coming home when they said they're going to. Yeah, I can't really think of anything else. So skipping school is one of them, yeah.
I think what we tell parents is be engaged in your child's life. I think there's a fine line between giving a teenager freedom and respecting their right to privacy and protecting them from potential predators that are out there in the street. One thing that we have asked parents through the police department in Fairfax County is to do something we call friend checking. So go onto your child's social media site, their Facebook site, their Twitter, and ask them, how do you know this individual? Why are you friends with them? If you have a 16-year-old daughter and she's friends with a 30-year-old male, there should be some questions being asked as to why they are friends on that social media site. So really it's all about parents and caretakers and other individuals in that child's life being engaged and being aware of their activities.
What do you think the trends are with regard to human trafficking, both in Northern Virginia and around the country? At this moment, the trend, is it going up, going down? Where's the trend?
It's a hard question to ask because statistics are scarce. We're just getting to the point where we're able to accurately collect statistics. I think that on a measurable level, we're going to see the numbers rise over the next several years as we become better at being able to track and identify instances of trafficking throughout the U.S. Whether or not trafficking itself is on the rise, I don't know for sure. I would feel comfortable saying that it is an issue that needs to be addressed. I don't think that it is declining.
Tell us about the gang involvement, MS-13, violent gangs, like that.
So what we're seeing across the country right now is trending towards most criminal street gangs getting into the business of sex trafficking. The FBI reports that over 35 states say that their gangs are involved in trafficking at this point. The reality is the gangs are realizing that it is low risk, high yield for them. They need to fund their gang operations, whether it's purchasing weapons, whether it's funding operations abroad, or whatever need the gang has. They're gaining their financial resources through illegal means. And sex trafficking is a lot less risky than narcotics trafficking with a similar yield as far as profit.
Why isn't it a federal crime? I mean, to move people, the Mann Act, we were talking earlier, why is it not a crime? The group that came to Northern Virginia moved them across. They went from South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Northern Virginia. Why was that not a violent offense? And we'll look at it and see. We'll put something in. I'll talk to Bob Goodlatte, and we'll do. You know, frankly, if this Congress doesn't kind of deal with this issue aggressively now, and it gets out of it, so we'll drop something in. And I want you to know what the criminal penalty should be. And I'm going to ask Senator McCain the same thing. What's the best state law? What is the penalty? I sent the video that you referenced. I sent that to every Supreme Court justice. And what we'll do is we'll send that to every Court of Appeals justice, because and we'll say we had some witnesses here talking. They said the judges are sort of wimping out, and maybe the judges don't quite understand, so we'll try to send that video, and we've had a good response to the Supreme Court justices. I've been very impressed. So what we'll do is we'll send that to each Court of Appeals has to make sure that but what should the penalty be, and why was that not a criminal act to take somebody across the line to Virginia from North Carolina or South Carolina?
So it is a criminal act to transport somebody across state lines for the purposes of commercial sex or really any illegal sexual conduct. The issue, particularly with the Mann Act, 18 U.S.C. 24, 21, and 22, is that if the victim is 18 years of age or older, there are no mandatory minimums. So the average sentence that we would get for that type of prosecution would be 0 to maybe 5 years for that type of conduct.
What did Neil McBride get in that case? What was the penalty?
There were juveniles involved in that case. The particular case that you're referencing was unique in that the statute that we used in prosecuting the two main players was 18 U.S.C. 2252A, subsection G, which is a child exploitation enterprise. It is the first time, to our knowledge, that code section has ever been used to prosecute a case of this nature. That has a 20-year mandatory minimum.
Now that's really because of Neil, isn't it? I mean, he kind of felt it and did it. Are other U.S. attorneys not using that around the country?
I feel very fortunate for being able to prosecute the majority of my cases through the Eastern District of Virginia. Mr. McBride was extremely supportive of our investigations and went after them very aggressively. I'm not sure what a lot of the other districts are seeing right now, but I do know that I think that the Eastern District of Virginia is one of the top districts in the United States for prosecuting sex trafficking right now.
Last two questions, I'm going to go to Mr. Fattah. In your written testimony, you mentioned that traffickers use services like Greyhound Bus to move victims from one location to another, in part because they recognize proper identification is not required to purchase or obtain a bus ticket. Therefore, they can transport minors and evade law enforcement. Are there modest steps that could be taken by bus companies and the like to make it more difficult for the services to be misused? And to your knowledge, have any of these companies been officially approached by law enforcement with this request?
So it would seem that it would be a logical step for any transportation service, particularly one that is transporting persons through interstate commerce from state to state, could require some form of identification to be able to purchase that ticket, if not a parent or guardian to purchase the ticket for them. What we commonly see is I could go today over to Union Station and purchase a bus ticket in the name of Frank Woolf and get on a bus and go wherever I wanted to go, and provide absolutely no sort of identification. Additionally, traffickers are able to recruit juveniles from out of state. So for example, we are currently working a case where the trafficker will send a bus ticket to Florida in the name of the juvenile, her proper name, but she requires no identification to purchase that ticket. All she has to do when she goes to the ticket counter is provide a password that the trafficker has set up. So they're even able to purchase these tickets online and not even be present where the victim is, and then bring the victim to them.
Okay, the last question, I'm going to go to Mr. Fattah. Tell us something about Backpage.com and some of these groups. I mean, can you actually solve this if you don't deal with Backpage.com and groups like that?
The truth is that these traffickers are very savvy, very much like when Craigslist was able to shut down their escort site, the traffickers just moved to another site. So really it's about addressing the issue of them actually advertising online and not so much Backpage in and of itself. There are other sites that exist throughout the United States, particularly on the West Coast. There's redbook.com, which is another online site. There's adultfriendfinder.com and several other internet sites that are being used by the traffickers. Backpage gets the most attention because it is probably the most commonly used site for advertising commercial sex.
How would you deal with that? If you were the Attorney General of the United States, how would you deal with Backpage and some of the others?
I think that by enhancing the penalties for using things like Backpage.com and online resources, enhancing the penalties for the traffickers, when they use things like that would discourage them from actually using it. And by doing so, it's going to really cut into their ability to make profit. There is very minimal ramifications for a trafficker to hide behind a computer screen right now. It makes our job more difficult because the paper trail in investigating those types of cases is immense and it really bogs down the speed of our investigations. So just making the penalties equal to the criminal conduct itself.
I'm going to go to Mr. Vitale. One last question. What percentage of the cases of individuals, God bless them, who are involved in this activity are we actually dealing with now? Are we dealing with 87%, 37%, 5% of the realm of the world here in the United States? What percentage are we really, and Stephanie, are we really kind of dealing with that we're helping and impacting and shutting down and nationwide, not just?
I think that's a hard question because we don't have hard statistics.
What do you think?
The generally accepted number is less than 1% of victims are being identified.
Just less than, so 99% are not.
That's correct.
Mr. Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm probably not going to get into a lot of questions because I know we want to hear from Mrs. McCain and from John. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I want to. The chairman knows I was in Tel Aviv a few months ago, and I was there on some other business, but a friend of mine, Sammy Segal, and his wife were doing a major project to help young women who have been trafficked sexually there, and it's a worldwide problem that the United States is. We have to focus on this, and the only question I would ask of Stephanie is that you had a number of interventions that did not work, and then you got some help and you got relocated. Is there anything in those earlier interventions that we can learn from, in which probation officers or others, police officers on the street, could do a better job at that might have gotten you to help sooner?
Well, the thing that kept making me return to my trafficker was fear of what he might do. So as long as there's that fear installed in the girls who are being trafficked, they're going to keep returning, or the use of drugs and their addiction to it. So really, there's really not much you can do about that unless you relocate them into a center further away from their trafficker where they're being trafficked, where their needs can be addressed.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm going to yield to questions so that we want to hear from our other witnesses. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank both of you for your testimony. We appreciate it very, very much. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, Bill. The next two witnesses, they'll appear together, will be first Cindy McCain, who's the co-chairman of the Arizona Governor's Task Force on Human Trafficking and has done a lot of work in this area. The other is John Ryan, who is CEO of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Welcome you both. You got the signs up there. Ms. McCain, you can go first, and then we'll go to Mr.
I have, thank you. I have submitted a formal statement to all of you that includes much more of the data and the research that we have found, but I did want to give you a few brief statements about why and what we are doing in Arizona and how this applies to the rest of the nation.
Okay, your full statement will appear in the record.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Congressman Woolf, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of you for doing this, for paying attention to this issue, for being a part of a solution to a problem that is infesting our youth. Let's be clear that this is not a humanitarian issue. I come to you as a humanitarian. It is a human rights issue. It's a basic human rights issue that these children are being denied. I'm encouraged by the increased attention to human trafficking solutions that I'm seeing in Arizona and across the nation and, of course, internationally where I work. I am encouraged, but there is a great deal more to do. There's a great deal more awareness to be had, and a great deal more of us need to fight this to the bitter end. I've been a lifelong humanitarian, and I was introduced to human trafficking strictly by chance. I saw it. I was in Calcutta. I happened to be in a small shop. Bottom line was, I realized that there were children being kept below the floorboards of this shop. I could see them. I could hear them. It clicked with me, but not really. But the bad news is I got up and walked out, and I never did anything. The estimates on numbers of trafficked persons are horrifying, but just as horrifying as each survivor's story, as you heard earlier, and the realization that there were many likely people along their path that could have done something and didn't, just like me. It's all of our responsibilities as citizens to pay attention and act when things are clearly wrong. We heard from the FBI. According to the FBI 2011 report, there are 293,000 U.S. children at risk right now. The average age for a girl or little boy to be trafficked is 13. Ambassador Louis C. DeBaca, Ambassador at Large for the State Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, recently estimated it's 27 million men, women, and children being victimized worldwide. NCMEC also estimates that a pimp can make between $150,000 and $200,000 per child per year. The average pimp has 4 to 6 little girls. It's low risk and a very high reward business. Drugs or weapons are sold once. Human beings can be sold over and over and over again. Through my role as co-chair of the Arizona Task Force on Human Trafficking, and with the partnership between the McCain Institute for International Leadership and Polaris Project, we've sought to strengthen anti-trafficking legislation in Arizona and the greater mountain states. I'm witnessing firsthand just how important it is that we work with local, state, and national stakeholders to effectively combat human trafficking, awareness being number one. I've also been involved with working with Clear Channel and the Polaris Project to advertise the National Human Trafficking Hotline in Arizona. Clear Channel very generously donated 50 digital billboards for the entire year of 2014. In any given month, it's going to reach 27 million viewers or blasts or whatever they call it. The 27 million people are going to see that. The national hotline number and other methods of help are being shown on these billboards. Our hope is that someone who needs help will be able to get help through this public awareness campaign. The task force heard recommendations from many who have been involved in the fight against human trafficking for years. We presented 27 specific recommendations to our governor, and I am pleased to say that the legislation is pending right now in the Arizona State Legislature. It toughens the sentencing structure for traffickers, adds sex and labor trafficking to the list of acts that constitute racketeering, increases penalties if the victim is taken from foster care or a shelter situation, and requires an escort service to include their license number in any ad, as well as to keep on file the proof of age of anyone that's depicted in their ad. In addition, our recommendations regarding specific human trafficking training for first responders and changes to administrative practice to increase protection for these vulnerable victims are being implemented in my home state right now. Training and awareness. Training and awareness. We keep hearing that over and over today. We right now are training other businesses in the city and state, such as Uber, cab companies, bars, hotels, motels, airline industry, mall security, and hospital ER personnel. Some of these people don't even believe human trafficking exists. I met recently with a very large and serious newspaper, the editorial board, and they literally said to me, "We don't believe this exists. We have a problem in this country." Let me be clear, our recommendations are not just for the Super Bowl, but are being held in Arizona in 2015, but they are long-reaching. Together, we Arizonans intend to make our state, as I like to say, a flyover state. Our message to traffickers: if you traffic in Arizona, you will go to jail for a very long time. In a recent study funded by the McCain Institute, which will be released in early March, we endeavored to explore the impact of a large sporting event, such as the Super Bowl, using scientific research, which has been lacking in a lot of the examples that we use. This is in conjunction with Arizona State University. Our preliminary findings are disturbing. They're terrifying. Researching prostitution ads placed on Backpage.com, we found sex trafficking to be very organized and very traceable. It shows a clear spiderweb effect that crisscrosses our country and spreads offshore. Nearly 75% of the phone numbers used in the flagged minor sex ads were linked to another girl or woman, indicating some sort of networking and organization. Make no mistake, this is organized crime at its best. The movement of girls for the Super Bowl was obvious, as our research found that 20% of the ads had been placed in other cities prior to or after the Super Bowl. One ad linked ads prior to the Super Bowl from Boston to Worcester to northern New Jersey, South New Jersey, Richmond, Virginia, Manhattan. But on Super Bowl Sunday, the ads were all listed in Boston for some reason. Another ad was linked to prior ads in North Bay, California, San Jose, San Francisco area, and then North New Jersey during the Super Bowl week, and then back to Oakland and San Francisco the following week. What we learned from this study so far includes the networks and circuits that facilitate the victimization of minors in sex trafficking are more pervasive than previously known. These networks keep these victims on the move, perhaps to avoid law enforcement detection, but more importantly, to find new customers. It's unlikely that they are avoiding law enforcement, as there simply is not enough law enforcement and law enforcement eyes on this issue. We need to create a national training for law enforcement specific to the complexities of sex trafficking, support the hiring and specialization of new law enforcement units around the country, and create a national tool that assists law enforcement in tracking the traffickers and allows the intelligence from these communities to transfer to one another and not be lost as it leaves one state, as a trafficker leaves one state and heads to another area. Networks also include gangs, as was mentioned earlier, which have become increasingly a strong part of sex trafficking of minors in this country, as well as the small organized sex trafficking groups. This research shows that sex trafficking as a part of a network is found in 3/4 of the ads on Backpage.com. I'm grateful for the interest and work of the federal government and what you have done on this issue so far. Together, we need to increase and broaden the training for our first responders, toughen the penalties for traffickers, fund awareness campaigns, and erase the word prostitution as it deals with children who are victims of sex trafficking. They are not prostitutes. They are victims. Lastly, we'd like to treat customers for what they are, child abusers. Thank you for inviting me today, and thank you for all the work that you are and will be doing on this issue. We look to you for great help on this. It's a critical time in our country, and we have an opportunity to take hold of this issue and really make a difference. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Ryan, but I just had a lot of thoughts when you were speaking. One, and I'll go to Mr. Harris, Mr. Fatah, and others before we ask the questions. If we can get the Arizona law, we'll send a copy of that, and I assume you all have vetted that law, and we'll send it to every governor, including my own. Secondly, we'll look at it and we will introduce it at the federal level to make it the federal law. Now, it may have changed, you know, this place works different, and see if we can kind of institutionalize that up here pretty early. So if you can get us the law that we can go to the governors and then get it so we can then put it in at the federal level to see. And then also this committee, working with Mr. Fogg, we fund the National Gang Intelligence Center. It's in Northern Virginia. It's in, we may change that and give them the responsibility for tracking national gang based on what Detective Woolf said, to track gangs and also this issue too, to sort of do the combination. So we can get that from you and we can do it. But, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, along with my partners who have testified today. This is a battle in which we have joined together. This is a true partnership. This is not the first time that we have met before you in this room. As we leave here today, we will continue our efforts in a joint manner. With your permission, I'll abbreviate my testimony because I think this subcommittee in particular has been engaged in this problem for some time, has an awareness of the nature of the problem, and by some of the questions that have already been asked, I think would be very helpful to continue with the Q&A process. But let me talk to you about what the role of the National Center has been and what we are seeing in this area. As you know, we receive a grant from the Department of Justice, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and in April of this year, we were about to celebrate our 30th anniversary of operation. We were founded in 1984. In those 30 years, we have answered 4 million calls. We have distributed over 8 million posters. We have helped resolve over 193,000 cases of missing children. That is a resolution rate of almost 98%. When we were founded in 1984, the rate was less than 63%. So as a result of the creation of this center and the support of Congress and our partners, I can report to you today we are making a difference, but we need to do more. We know what happens in your district, Mr. Chairman. We have worked with Detective Woolf. We have worked with you and your office and your community as you have addressed this problem. You found firsthand that in one of the most affluent counties in this country, there was a systemic problem of child sex trafficking, which was based in one of the highest rated school systems in the country. So the message we learned, and I hope the rest of the country has learned, if it can happen outside our doors here, it can and is happening everywhere. We don't have an exact count of the number of victims of this pernicious activity, but I can tell you what we have observed firsthand at the National Center. As the clearinghouse for the reports from both the public, law enforcement, as well as what we refer to as the electronic service provider community, who own and operate the platforms, whereupon a lot of this activity is now occurring. The reports are escalating, the number of arrests is rising, and most importantly, the number of minors, of children, like Stephanie, are being rescued. So to those who challenge us in this battle that we cannot put an exact figure on this, I tell you that if I go to your community, I can assure you that there are, at that very time, a high number of children being trafficked while well engaged in that discussion. Under a grant from the Justice Department, we recently established a training curriculum, which has been recommended by prior witnesses here. We call it the Child Sex Trafficking Awareness and Response Program. We just launched our first in-person training conference in Los Angeles. We launched it there for a number of reasons. First and foremost, we didn't have the federal funding in our budget, but we saw the critical need and the demand. We had a private businessman from the Los Angeles area step up, who I can now say is on our board because he has such a passion for these issues. He paid out of his own pocket for that training conference and has told us that he will continue to do that as long as there is an engaged audience. We trained over 50 investigators, prosecutors, members from the medical profession, NGOs. We know, as has been pointed out earlier, this is a battle that cannot be solved by law enforcement. It cannot be solved by the NGOs. We have to engage all the stakeholders, and we are doing that in our strategy at the National Center. We've also developed what we call a critical and runaway unit, which handles these cases of missing children who become victims of sex trafficking. We have identified, Mr. Chairman, that in 2013, 1 out of 7 reported endangered runaways were also the victims of sexual exploitation. 1 out of 7. That is real. That is alarming. We also found that out of that community, that 67% of those victims are runaways from foster care. The challenge is enhanced because most states do not have a reporting requirement when a child goes missing from foster care. There is no current federal law that requires reporting to law enforcement, let alone the National Center. So what happens? We heard from Stephanie. She's an example of that problem. These children, for various reasons, are not getting the care and the security that they are owed and promised in many of these homes. So they are lured away by what they hope to be a more promising future, and they then become a victim of a pimp and a predator. Many of them will return at some point to these homes, and the homes are not aware of what has happened. So their problem is not being addressed, let alone reported. I can report to you that we have instituted a program with 2 states, Illinois and Florida. They are reporting to law enforcement. They are reporting to the National Center. As a result of that, our analysts are able to support the efforts of the first responders, identify who these children are, where they are likely to be, who they may be associated with, because we have the benefit of all the data from all these reports that I referred to earlier. We have the support of the technology community, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Microsofts. They give us the analytical tools to make sense out of this mass of publicly available data that law enforcement doesn't either have the training or the opportunity to utilize. But we do, and we share that with law enforcement. Let me give you some other examples. In Operation Cross Country, which, as you know, is the FBI's nationwide endeavor with state and local law enforcement agencies, this past August, 230 agencies were involved. What many people don't realize, over that 3-day period, the National Center is staffing up the command center here in Alexandria at our headquarters, which I know you have visited, sir, and they are providing information to the boots on the ground who these children may be based on our analysis of all the reports we received. You referenced, sir, that 105 minors were saved in August. We helped identify 20 of those based on reports that we had and we could share with law enforcement. That is critical. One case stood out. We were able not only to identify one of these victims for law enforcement, but we knew that child had a critical medical issue, that if left unattended, she would be seriously impaired or in jeopardy. Not only could law enforcement identify her, treat her as a victim, but they were able, when she went into a seizure, get her the immediate medical care that she required. So that there are partnerships that work. We need to build on those partnerships. And we point to this committee, frankly, sir, as being our champion in these efforts. Let me talk about some of the other results of our work with the ICACs, the state and local task forces, along with the FBI. Since these initiatives targeting minors who are being commercially sex trafficked were launched, they have recovered over 3,100 victims, convicted over 1,400 pimps. 11 of them have received life sentences. So that suggests to us the nature of their long criminal history. This is not an isolated crime. They are in the industry, an organized industry, and they are violent. Our role, again, is to provide that analytical support to these agencies. We have found a 32% increase in the number of children recovered, a 43% increase in the number of pimps arrested. So to those who want to challenge the statistics, those statistics are real. We stand behind those. We have learned also from the reports we're getting that in the foster children environment, that when a child is not reported missing, when they turn 18, they literally are off the radar. Nobody was looking for them when they were a minor, and no one is looking for them or aware of what is happening to them once they reach the age of 18. So what is happening to these young girls? Well, when they're being trafficked as minors and not getting the help that they need, when they become adults, they don't automatically walk away from that, that trade. The same symptoms, the same threats of violence, intimidation are continuing. And what is the life they have ahead of them if they don't get that intervention? So we are working here with your colleagues, sir, to make sure that there is federal legislation mandating the report when these children go missing to law enforcement and then to the National Center. We can and will make a difference. Let me close by giving you one real case. We were receiving reports of a missing Florida girl. By the time she was 15, we knew that we had over 13 reports, separate reports of her going missing. We didn't know who she was. Law enforcement didn't know who she was. But while we are scouring these websites that you've identified, particularly Backpage, we are developing databases, in this case, of information that could help lead to the identification of these minors. We have a database of tattoos, unique marks. And what we found when a young girl was actually arrested, the police wisely took pictures of the tattoo she had. They sent those into our analysts. We were then able to review our database and make a match. It matched a 15-year-old girl who we still didn't know who she was, but we knew she was still being trafficked. We also had a phone number. That was a common link through these reports on Backpage. So we alerted law enforcement to not only look for this girl, but you may want to use this phone number in your investigation. They posed as a John. They called that number. Lo and behold, they were offered a visit at a hotel, and they were able to rescue this now 15-year-old girl who, when she was saved, reported that she had been trafficked since she was 13 across the country, a minimum of 5 times a day. Where would she be without the law enforcement intervention? Where would she be without the National Center and all our partners here today? So we make a commitment to this committee and you, sir, who have been truly our champion. I wish you were not retiring. We will keep up this fight. We will work with you. We will challenge those who need to do more. This resources are part of it, but it's not an excuse to do more. We will do more with less. The battle will continue, but we do seek your help so we can work and do this more nationally and in a more comprehensive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. I'm going to go to Mr. Harris, but Mr. Fatah and I, we have always, we don't really have differences on very much at all, but on these issues, we have been together, and I want to thank you and Ernie Allen and all your staff, and any member that hasn't gone over there, you got to just go or send your staff over to see it. It's pretty incredible what they're actually doing. But I want to thank you and all of your people and the commitment that I think Mr. Fatah and I, but we will be there even on these days that they were doing. And this was one thing that we were not going to have any negative impact on you. So you have our word here. Mr. Harris.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, again for bringing this to the attention of the committee and to help bring it to the attention of the country and maybe that newspaper editorial board. I'm going to follow up with what I asked the detective before. How prevalent is the involvement of drugs in the human trafficking of underage individuals?
Well, the feedback we get primarily from law enforcement echoes what Detective Woolf has testified to. It is a tool that is used by the predators to maintain the control over these minors, because once they have that chemical dependency, that predator becomes their supplier. So it's a very difficult cycle to break. And some of them, frankly, enter into that, behavior because they have a challenge to begin with. So it just complicates things. So it is a prevalent part of that cycle of behavior.
I completely agree, but I'd also like to add something. The drug element in this, these are the same guys that are trafficking these kids. They're trafficking drugs. They're trafficking guns. They're trafficking poached animals out of Africa. These networks are all one and the same in what they do. So all too often, the drug guys have become very good at hiding what they're doing, and it's very difficult for us to be able sometimes to find them or find what they're doing. Follow the girls. You're going to find the drugs, too, and the guns, and the poached animals.
And I take it that that legalizing some of these drugs is not going to solve this problem at all?
I would not, well, I'm not an expert
right.
in that field, but I would not recommend that.
No.
Do you think that using enhanced penalties, since it's so prevalent, the coexistence, and clearly trafficking is involved when these, you can call them pimps, whatever you want to call them, traffic to the underage, that federal penalty enhancements under drug laws could be used as a tool for law enforcement? Just like, if you use a gun in the commission of a crime, there's an enhanced penalty that's very useful to law enforcement. How about drug trafficking as a penalty?
Yes. I think any penalty that is not only on the books now, but that can be defined specifically as human trafficking, along with the drug element, we need this. This is exactly what we need to be able to stop this.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that be part of anything coming out of the commitment is use our Controlled Substances Act in conjunction with our trafficking laws to enhance penalties, since these so frequently coexist. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. McCain, you said in your opening statement, trafficking for sex and labor. And sometimes when we're dealing with minors, they're being forced into child labor situations also. And so I just want you to elaborate a little bit on that for the record.
The trafficking aspect with regards to Arizona is exactly the same. I mean, we're going to get these guys. they will be handled as victims perhaps differently, and that's something for the victim services and for the folks that do that on a daily basis to determine. But let me say on victim services, which is something we've talked about in here, it's not only just funding for victim services, which is the no-brainer in this whole thing, but it's also about the ability for these traffickers. I have a woman at home that runs an organization called Streetlight. She said, I've got them in there. I can keep them safe within the building, but the traffickers are outside peeking in the windows. What do I do? These are, consequences of what occurs. And as was mentioned, she was afraid of the trafficker. So that's a whole element in this that has to be a specific part in how we deal with the victims.
Now, you also said that the customers should be treated as what they are, child abusers.
Absolutely.
Right. So in terms of, we've focused a lot on what to do about the trafficker. What about this, the person who's calling this number, right, who's visiting the hotel? Do you have some sense about, given all of the complexities here, about how, if anything, our country might think about, trying to deal with the demand side on this question?
Well, in Arizona, I've lived out there my entire life. 10, 20 years ago, we used to publish the pictures of the Johns, or child abusers, as I like to call them.
See, I don't think of them as Johns. Or, some
don't like
guy
the
who
word
wants
John.
to have
Yeah.
a sex with a child.
A child, yeah.
I agree with you as a child abuser, right? So
We
I'm
used
trying
to
to figure out
publish-
what we.
Well, we used to publish their picture in the paper, and that's one tiny portion of this. But until we get serious about, number one, prosecuting these guys and shaming them, because it is what it is, it's child abuse. If we were to have a child abuser of another kind, someone that beat a child, we'd go after him with all fours. But yet somebody who services a child sexually, we seem to kind of shove it under the rug. I was told by one person, well, why should we prosecute these guys, or publish their picture? They're going to go home and someone's going to abuse them. Well, why not? Why not, I say? Well, their wives will get after them. Good thing. Let them get after them. These are bad guys.
John, now the numbers you went through are, substantial. If you could talk about this in a daily matter, the fact that I don't think the country has a good understanding of the number of young people who go missing each day.
Sure.
In the country.
There are approximately 1,500 children that go missing every day. And those include runaways, those who are missing with unexplained absences. It includes those who are abducted. But the one thing I commend the center for doing before I came on board was to treat every child runaway as an endangered runaway, because they don't know the risk that they're going to encounter.
You don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we see that in this child sex trafficking, landscape. They think they may be going to a better place or for the right reasons, and then these predators, as has been pointed out, are extremely astute at identifying vulnerable victims for a variety of reasons.
We've gotten a lot better at this reporting and, the Amber Alerts and everything.
Yes.
What is this loophole for kids in foster care? And why is it that states how is it that someone doesn't have the responsibility to report a child missing?
Unfortunately, there is a lack of regulations or laws that mandate the reporting. So it's really based on a voluntary system. And some would argue that there's a financial interest at stake if a facility were to report a problem of recurring children under their care going missing, let alone being abused.
So
That
if I
would
can
put the
sketch
spotlight.
through these numbers, a minority of the children who go missing are in foster care. A majority you said some 60-some% of those found in these circumstances are from foster care.
Yes,
Is that accurate?
yes. That's based on the reports that
Right.
we received.
So this loophole here, or this missing link in the reporting chain is very important that we close it.
It's alarming. I think that until reporting is made mandatory, we will not only know how many children are missing, but more importantly, no one is looking for them. They're not going to have an opportunity for the intervention that they need. And the life cycle that they are in,
Right.
it's not going to change.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's a good point, Mr. Fatah. Thank you very much. I appreciate, I have a couple of questions and then I'll kind of end, but I think it's been a good hearing and we've had a lot of ideas. What are the rates of arrest for those who are doing this? Does 50% of them get arrested, or 33%, 1%? What do you think? What do you think the rate of arrest is?
You know, we can only speculate. I think Detective mentioned maybe 1%. I certainly wouldn't dispute that. We know that's the most underreported crime to begin with. So even if we had, you know, the arrest reports as a criteria, that would only be a snapshot. So, you know, we can only base on the reports that we're getting of suspected trafficking. And they have increased exponentially ever since we established this child sex trafficking unit approximately 3 years ago. And we know law enforcement is seeing the same.
Ms. McCain, the task force that you're a co-chairman of, was it appointed by the governor? Was it a state legislature? How many states have a task force like that? Do you have any idea?
Gosh, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay. What if you can give us the kind of what is it a bipartisan? So if maybe Mr. Fatah and I could send a letter to every governor saying that the state of Arizona has put this together and this is a model, would you consider doing that so every state is kind of uniformly kind of doing it? Secondly, if we can get the Arizona state law from you, and maybe we can ask Nick Mick to look at it
Absolutely.
to see, you know, there may be something else that you think, and I think Mr. Fatah's own thing on the foster child issue is something that others may not, so we can kind of make the very best law, and we will drop the bill in
Excellent.
and ask people to co-sponsor it and do that, and then we'll also, assuming the committee members agree, try to change the language for the National Gang Intelligence Center to have gang intelligence and a category with regard to this issue, so they're tracking not only MS-13 or Bloods and the Crips, but also any activity like this. And then if you could tell us about the penalties of I guess what the penalties are that you think that we should change at the federal level, and then also too, I think the Congress has to deal with the Backpage.com and the other one or two that he mentioned. I think if we fail to deal with that, then I think we will be pontificating that we care deeply about an issue, but we're given the presentation of what solves the issue when we're saying we're not going to go there because, you know, we're going to take on the high-tech community, or maybe, I mean, frankly, I think people ought to go to Arizona and just picket the home or wherever the guy, or Texas, or is it, where I didn't know, or go Northern Virginia, wherever it is, whoever is running them everywhere, and if they go, I'll go to one of them, but just go outside and say, you know, with the idea of the operating on the premise, maybe they don't know, and so now they know, maybe they'll be able to get them to stop it. I wanted to have one last question, if you both have any thoughts on it, which takes it a little bit differently, but we're focused on sexual trafficking, but it's larger than that. Oftentimes, we've seen people forced into domestic servitude or sweatshops. Earlier this year in Northern Virginia, unfortunately, in my congressional district, we saw 2 workers were freed from a possible domestic servitude situation, meaning they were held, frankly, by the Saudis, the diplomatic resident of the Saudis. And so we hear stories of people that work at the World Bank, people work for this embassy, that embassy. How prevalent do you think it is that different embassies, because we know the Saudis were involved, we know there was a big, local news stories covered it. What are your thoughts about that issue whereby an embassy or a World Bank brings someone over, takes their passports away, they don't speak the language? It is a form of labor trafficking, if you will. You know, you're in a strange country, you're working 12, 15 hours a day. Do you both have any comments about that?
Number one, the woman that was just outed in New York City, the diplomat, the Indian diplomat, and then she fled the country. That's unacceptable. I mean, there was clearly laws being broken. There was human laws being broken within her house or whatever it was, and she just skipped. I mean, I don't know how you handle that from a government standpoint, or whether you can handle it. But on the southern border where we are in Arizona, it's the same thing but a little different. They bring them in trucks. They take their passports, even if they have passports. They may not smuggle them over the border, and sometimes leave them to die in the desert because they can't get them any farther, or the coyotes don't show up to move them. The whole issue of labor trafficking not only has to be dealt with, but it has to be considered. The labor trafficking that took place in the home and the labor trafficking that's taking place on the Arizona border is the same thing, but it's different. So there's different kinds of things that we need to address with regards to labor trafficking around the country. The diplomatic thing is much different from Arizona and from what happens in California with some of the Koreans and the Vietnamese that are smuggled in. So I think that's a bigger issue that needs to be dealt with, and I do believe it needs to be dealt with on the federal level.
Mr. Ryan?
Well, what we see is there is a correlation for those, and again, we're talking about minors at the National Center, those who are reported as being victims of sexual exploitation. There's also frequently a component that they're also subjected to, slave labor. Unfortunately, it's part and parcel many times, even when we're dealing with minors. So there's no tracking per se of, that, but that would be something, frankly, that might be worthy of a more empirical study, because we do see some parallel activity there.
So you would not include it in a bill dealing with that? Maybe we could write the Justice Department and ask them to do an in-depth analysis to come back in 6 months or something?
I think that would be a wise suggestion, recommendation.
Okay, and I think what we'll do, assuming Mr. Fatah agrees too. Yes. Okay, Mr. Fatah, yes. We're both from the city of Philadelphia, and maybe that's why we agree so well. Maybe what we can also do is, years ago, we put language in asking the State Department, and Secretary Powell did it, to have a major conference internationally on this issue. Maybe we should put language in directing the Attorney General or the administration, whoever they think is appropriate, to put on a major conference. Would that make sense, to bring in every state, to sort of one big, would that make sense?
I think it's a great suggestion. We deal with this from different platforms sometimes, so I don't think any one of us have the full scope of the problem, or more importantly, what the trends and patterns are and how we can come up with a comprehensive strategy. So I think that would be an important step to get us there.
Okay, do you have any thoughts on that?
I completely agree, and if nothing more in that conference to address the inability for our first responders particularly to communicate with each other across state lines. It was brought to my attention that what they really needed was this guy in South Dakota in the squad car can pull up this house or whatever it is and see if there's anything noted about it, or see if there's somebody, from another state. They have no way to talk to each other, and that's a large part as we talk about the law enforcement aspect of this that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think if we're going to war, we got
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe what we'll do is we'll write a letter to the Attorney General asking him to do it this year, and if he does it, then we would just put a line in and set aside the money to do that. Maybe we would ask him to work with Nick Mick.
That would be wonderful. You know, we'd be happy to, be the convener and make sure there's all the
That may-
stakeholders.
Yeah, that may be a good idea. Any other members have any questions?
Dr. Harris is a yes, too.
Dr. Harris? Well, I want to thank both of you and also Stephanie and Detective Wolf. I guess he's left there for your testimony. We thank you both, and with that, the hearing adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, it's great.